Welcome to Raised on D&D podcast. Each month, Raised on D&D brings you inspirational interviews with tips and strategies to enrich your family's gaming experience. Your host for Raised on D&D has been a game master for 30 years and father to 3 gamers. Here is Nick Cardarelli.
Welcome back to Raised on D&D. I'm your host, Nick Cardarelli, and my next guest is from Beloit, Wisconsin. He's a winner of 17 Origins Awards, 10 Ennies, and a number of Inquest Fan Awards, and the Scribe Award. He is best known for his work on dozens of D&D books, including Dungeonology, Magic the Gathering comics, and the new Endless Quest books. He's currently working on Shotguns and Sorcery, the role-playing game. Please welcome Matt Forbeck. Hi, Matt.
Hey, Nick. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for being on the show. Matt, how did you get into tabletop role?
Well, I started out when I was 12 or 13 years old. One of my friends from across the street from me, his mother picked up the blue box Dungeons & Dragons set from Kmart on a blue light special and gave it to her eldest son as a Christmas present. And we kind of knew each other but didn't hang out all that much. And his younger brother was in my grade. And my parents got together with his mother, and they said, you should really go over and play this game with these kids, right? And we're like, yeah, whatever. Finally, around summertime, we got bored and we weren't in school anymore. We got together and started playing the game. I think we played every day all summer long after that. And we probably got slaughtered every day, too. I mean, we came up with a new party every time. We're like, oh, we got killed. Let's do it again. You know, it's just like a bad video game. But we had a blast with it. I've been playing it. I still play it from time to time. I don't have as much time as I used to, but I still love the game, and I've been working on it and doing different things for it for decades now.
Amazing. Now you're a father. How many children do you have?
I have 5 children, the eldest of which is in college. He's about to finish up at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And then we also have a set of 17-year-old quadruplets who are going to be going off to college next year.
Well, congratulations. Mine are 14, 12, and 11. I'm worried about having 3 teenagers all at once, and you have, wow, amazing.
Yeah, it's going to be kind of nuts.
Yes. The other day you were talking about just having to fill out all the FAFSA forms for them and what a daunting task that was.
Well, I suppose doing a lot of paperwork for RPGs has prepared me for this, right? It's like filling out character sheets for everybody.
First off, my children are huge fans of Endless Quest.
Oh, fantastic.
My youngest was reading the Castle Ravenloft episode with the cleric. The Endless Quest books, for our audience who haven't read them yet, the reader gets to make a choice, and there's several stories based on those decisions. Well, he goes to my wife, Cassandra, and he says, I have done this like 3 different ways. I keep dying. And Cassandra says, well, keep doing it until you don't die. And he said, there's an option where I don't die.
Well, it is Castle Ravenloft. It should be pretty deadly, right? It's all vampire.
Right. And it was wonderful. He had a wonderful time doing it. And I remember it was days later, he found the path, or one of the paths where he was successful, and he came in cheering, and he goes, I didn't die, I won. and it's wonderful. It's wonderful to see the Endless Quests be reimagined and resurrected for a new generation. So I know a lot of our fans who are listening are big fans of those books. Gaming with your children. So do you play tabletop RPGs with your kids?
I do. We don't have an ongoing campaign at home, mostly because they're in high school, and getting 5 or 6 of us together at a time can be intriguing, challenging at the best. However, we do set aside time occasionally for different games, and we always play Dungeons & Dragons every time we go to a convention, which we do 3 or 4 times a year. And we'll just join up with whatever Adventurers League game is going on. Gamehole Con, for instance, back here in Madison in November, and we signed up for a couple different events, and then we played a 12-hour Dungeons & Dragons event that sent us to Avernus and had just a ball. It was a lot of fun.
Can you take us back to when you first introduced the children to tabletop role-playing games? How old would you say they were?
Sure. They were usually between 8 and 10 years old, I believe. Marty, my eldest, actually let's see, I actually wrote a series of articles, I believe, for The Escapist about when I was teaching him how to play the game, and that was for 4th edition back in the day when that just started out. And then the quadruplets, I've introduced them at various points. I tried to pitch off, Marty, I'm busy. Why don't you try Dungeon Mastering? And he was a little bit too busy to handle. Well, wasn't even that he was too busy, but the inherent problems with an older brother trying to wrangle 4 younger siblings crop up no matter what you can do. It's hard enough being a dungeon master, much less having to do it with 4 kids who are saying, I don't have to listen to you. So it got a little tricky there. I remember I was actually looking at a photo of this the other day. The first Dungeons and Dragons game Marty played in was at GaryCon 1. And GaryCon is the convention that's held for Gary Gygax by his family, by his sons and daughters, on the anniversary, or relative to the anniversary of his death. And I think you're up to GaryCon 12 this year.
Yes.
And GaryCon 0 was the wake after his funeral. We all went to the American Legion Hall where he used to have GenCon, actually, and Winter Fantasy, and bunches of other conventions back in the old days. And at GaryCon 1, I sat down with Marty. We played the original white box Dungeons and Dragons adventure, Palace of the Vampire Princess or some such, I forget. And it was the first ever published Dungeons and Dragons adventure. It wasn't even published by TSR. It was published by a different company, third-party company. And it was run by Frank Menser, who was the vice president of TSR under Gary Gygax for many years. And at the end of the game, Frank hands out certificates for people to frame and put on their walls. And Marty still has his in his bedroom. I mean, it was a great time. It was a great game. I mean, if you have to be introduced to Dungeons and Dragons, playing white box D&D with Frank Menser as your GM is really a good way to go.
That is incredible.
One of the great things about GaryCon is not just that it's a great place to play games and see a lot of people, but it also is a TSR reunion of sorts. In fact, they have an official TSR reunion night every Saturday. They have a party and all the old TSR people get together. And I never worked at TSR, who are the original publishers of Dungeons & Dragons, but I did a lot of freelancing for them, and I got offered jobs by them twice back when I was freelancing. And so for me, it's very much old homes week. I get to see a lot of old friends and catch up with people. Even though I was never an official member of that crew, it's still a great deal of fun for me.
That's fantastic. We talked with Luke Gygax, and he told us a little bit about GaryCon and how it came to be. And like you mentioned, GaryCon 0 being the wake after his father passing. And just a beautiful story of a family continuing to game together and allowing other families to as well. Can you share with us maybe a favorite or a funny memory of gaming with the children at any stage where they maybe did something that surprised you as players, handled a situation in a way that you didn't really expect, that kind of thing?
Well, I tell you, when I was running that series of articles, I was writing the series of articles for The Escapist about Marty and his friends, and we were teaching how to play D&D. They were pretty young, and some of the kids just wanted to kill anything that crossed their path, right? They've been playing Call of Duty and such, and they're like, just murder everything. And I'm like, oh, geez, that's pretty bloodthirsty for a bunch of middle schoolers. But okay, sure, And they were in some kind of a city, and they were about to murder somebody for no reason at all. And Marty stood up and said, wait, no, we can't do this. This is wrong. And actually stood up to his friends in the course of the game. I was like, wow, that was a really brave moment for him. Because, there's outside social penalties, perhaps, for doing this kind of stuff. But I was really proud of him for being able to say, no, I think my character would not just do this stuff. I'm going to play my character, right? I also thought there was another neat moment where, and this is Marty again, where we're playing a game at a convention. And he starts thinking, okay, can I just start coming in with Molotov cocktails? Can we create gunpowder? And I'm like, wait a minute, you're playing Dungeons and Dragons. You have to think about what the spirit of the game is. That's not, sure. In your home campaign, go wild, do whatever the heck you want. But when you're playing a convention game with a lot of people, you don't just suddenly take that sword and sorcery campaign and turn it into Gatling guns and other crazy stuff. You play sword and sorcery. You have to have a sword. And I just saw it like click in his head. He's like, oh yeah, wait, you're right. I need to play the game as it's intended. As there's a social contract with the people at the table. I need to play it the way that we're all wanting to play it so we can have fun together, as opposed to let's see what I can break, right? Which is, there's some certain amount of fun in there. I think a lot of people, especially younger people, kids, go through this further. Like, what happens if I pull this lever, right? Or what happens if I do this crazy thing? Where are the limits on this thing? And it's interesting if you say, well, there are limits, and these are the limits. These are why they're here. And if we all agree with this, at least for this game, it'll be fun. And maybe if you want to do something screwy, we'll try that some other time. But while we're playing this game with these people, let's adhere to the unspoken ground rules that we have with each other.
Those are both really great examples about how role-playing games helps with social interaction and really fosters a sense of bravery and being able to stand up for yourself and for what you think is right and things like that. And that kind of leads me to our next point, which is you've been gaming for decades, since you were 12, like I have. What kind of things do you feel like you yourself have learned from tabletop role-playing game that's helped you as an adult professionally in the real world? And more importantly, what are some of the lessons that you hope that gaming with your children, what they're going to take away moving forward now that they're in this transition to college and adult life?
Right. Well, I don't often get accused of being an adult, so let me start with that. It's, because I basically make my living. My wife says I'm basically a 14-year-old boy still in a lot of ways, because I make my living making things up, right? And never had to really graduate beyond that. All that said, and joking aside, I think that one of the reasons that role-playing games have been very helpful in my life is that it allows you to explore social concerns and situations that you would otherwise probably never encounter and may be really uncomfortable for you in real life, right? I was a fairly shy kid when I started playing. I very bookish, kept to myself, didn't really care about the outside world all that much. And I think playing games really brought me out of my shell. Now, granted, a lot of that probably would have happened as I went through puberty and everything else and matured. But I think games helped me, helped to give me a framework for that I can rationalize and wrap my head around and keep myself on track with. One of the reasons I remember learning how to not be shy was when I was a kid, when I was like 18, 19 years old, I would be selling games at conventions. I ended up working at different people's booths fairly early on. And they would say, we need people to run in this demo. Go find us some people to play the demo. And I would literally say, okay, what am I going to do? I have to ask people walking by, would they like to play this game? And at one point, I got up on a chair and stood up and said, who wants to play a demo? You want to play a demo. You want to play a demo. Come on down here. We're playing right now. Come on. I can see you. You got curiosity in your eyes. Come over here. And just learning how to do that kind of hawker, unashamed, let's have some fun. Let's get into this kind of a thing that really was not in my nature before that. I think it was pretty fantastic. And I think it's helped me a lot in not being afraid of people, not being shy of people. And realize that, especially when it comes to games, most people at a gaming convention are there to have a good time. So if you're there to help them do that, they're on your side, right? There's nothing really to be afraid of with that. And so I think games really help me with that. I'm hoping that it'll help out my kids with that too. I noticed that we go to conventions, they're a lot more outgoing. It's particularly with the quadruplets, it's an interesting social situation because they don't really get lonely like a lot of other kids do. You don't see them sitting around saying, oh, geez, I wish there was somebody my age here to play with, because each of them has 3 kids exactly their age in the next room or in the room with them to play with. So, but when I take them to conventions, sometimes they'll say, hey, I want to go off and do my own thing. And boom, Patrick's off playing role-playing games. Helen's decided she wants to do a 12-hour D&D thing. Kenny is running off to go shop over here. Nicholas is hanging out with the other guys over here. Everybody's doing their own thing. They're having a great time. And I think it's wonderful for them to, in an environment that's generally speaking safe and welcoming, that they can wander off and test their own limits and their own comfort levels, that kind of stuff. When I went out to my first convention, my first GenCon was back in 1982, I think, right? GenCon 15. And my dad drove me and my friends up to the convention, it was in Racine, University of Wisconsin Parkside, between Racine and Kenosha back in those days. My dad drove us up in the van, dropped us off at the door and said, I'll see you in 12 hours, right? And then just drove away. He's like, you're trapped out in the middle of it was a college campus at the time. He's like, you're at a college campus in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by cornfields. What kind of trouble can you get into? Well, you didn't. We got into trouble. But it was good, clean fun. It was really, we felt protected and had this kind of a sanctuary that we're in. We were able to explore different things and do different things and have fun with people. It really worked well for us.
And I think it's great that you talk about the safety of conventions, because my first novel that I read from you was Dangerous Game.
It's not about the safety of conventions.
No.
It's like the opposite. But that's the reason it's a novel, because it's not real. It's never.
The murder mystery whodunit at GenCon was beautiful, and I loved it. And it really unfortunately, because of where I am in the country and inability to travel, I've never been to a GenCon. So reading your novel made me feel like I was at GenCon, because it was so detailed, and it mentioned a lot of the TSR alums in the game and that sort of thing. So that was really great.
Thank you. I really enjoyed writing those. To me, that's a trilogy of books. And it was a love letter to GenCon, which has really been one of the anchors in my life, right? This next year will be my 39th GenCon in a row. Wow. I've been going since I was a little kid. And I'm on the committee that chooses the guests of honor, and I work with the writing symposium, and I just have a ball there. My kids have been going to GenCon. Marty's been going since he was like, this is either like his 9th or 10th year coming up. And the quads started coming just a few years after that, too. And, when I started taking him to GenCon, especially other conventions, well, I was there with him, but at GenCon, it's a working convention for me, so I can't pay attention to him the entire time. But the first year, like, my dad flew him out, and we only had him there Saturday and Sunday, right? And the same thing when the quads came out, my wife brought him out, and we only had him there for 2 days because it could be really overwhelming. And then a couple years, for the next couple years after that, they would come out for the full 4 days, but we always made sure to have them take a day off in the middle, right? They go to the zoo or a museum or something like that. Because a convention like GenCon, which has 70,000 people show up at it, can be really overwhelming for people, especially for children, right? It's one thing to go to your local convention where there's 5,000 people and lots of room and a lot of elbow room. But when you have 70,000 people taking over an entire major city, then it can just kind of wear on you after a while. Me, I love it. I mean, I'm the most extroverted I ever get when I'm at GenCon, and I have a ball. And you can tell because on Monday morning I sound a little hoarse right now, but on Monday morning you can barely hear me because I've been screaming over everybody for 4 days on end. But
my wife and I see the videos of everyone going in, the opening doors.
Oh, it's crazy.
And it's so crazy. And my wife suffers from severe social anxiety. So she said that is the convention you're going to by yourself. And
you don't have to go in then. You can go. You can let everybody swallow, swarm in and then come later. It's okay.
I said, I'm sure it clears out a little bit. And I said, you see that guy right in the middle by the door? That's going to be me. And she goes, you could have all that. So,
no, it's such a great time. I love it. My kids love it. Last year, my wife's not a gamer, and she used to come to conventions with me before the kids. And then when the kids were young, she stopped going. And then she's been coming with me as the kids were growing up. Last year, I ended up having a job where she didn't have the time off. And she said, you're going to go on your own. And you know what? It worked out great. The kids had just turned 17. The quads were 17. Marty was 20. And they had a great time. And they didn't need me holding their hand the entire time, right?
Right.
By that time, when I was that age, my parents let me run around anywhere at a convention, and I didn't have a cell phone. I couldn't be tracked or anything. It was just like show up whenever you show up. So by comparison, plus they have each other to watch each other's backs. But by comparison, it's incredibly safe and easy, and they've been doing it for years now too. So they feel like it's literally they'll tell me it's their favorite time of year. Right.
Wow.
It's fantastic. And for me, it is too. I mean, for me, it's a combination of like Christmas and vacation with my kids and reunion with all my buddies and, people I've known for decades. One thing a year I never miss. I mean, people are like, what are you doing this summer? Are we going to schedule a family vacation? Blah, blah, blah. GenCon's this weekend. Nothing else happens GenCon, right? I run a couple of different things there at the show too. I run this thing called the Diana Jones Award, which is an award for the most excellent thing in gaming. And I think we're going to be doing our 20th time this year. And it's run by a guy named James Wallace, who actually does the award stuff, and I help him out with that. But then at GenCon, I actually host the party that happens there every year. And it's an industry-only party where all the different game designers and people who work for different companies show up. And we drink beer, and we talk about games, and then we stop everything for 15 minutes to give out an award, and then we go back to doing that. And it's always held the Wednesday night before GenCon. In fact, if you read Dangerous Games, which you said you had, it opens up at the Diana Jones Award party.
That's right.
Which I've been hosting for forever now. It seems kind of screwy because it was just this thing we came up with as a lark because James had a trophy he wanted to do something with. And now we're going to be going on our 20th year of doing this. And just having fun, just having a great time.
What is the significance of the name of the award?
There's a story behind that. The Diana Jones Award, if you ever actually see it, it's got this wooden base and it's a plexiglass pyramid, right? And inside of it are burnt pieces of the Indiana Jones role-playing game. And the only part of the logo that survived was Diana Jones. Right? And it was burnt by the people at TSR UK after the entire division got shut down and everybody was laid off. So they decided to burn a copy of the game, made this trophy out of it, and then became a pub trivia trophy that got traded back and forth between them and the guys from Games Workshop and a few other British groups, and eventually just found its way into James's hands for, I don't know who he paid or won it from or whatever, but ended up with a trophy. Now it's been this traveling trophy. It's just been a great tradition. I mean, we've had all sorts of different winners. It goes from GenCon one year, Fiasco, which is a great role-playing game, but for grown-ups, won 1 year. Irish Gaming Convention charity auctions won 1 year, right? We don't really care what it is. We set our own criteria. Whatever we think was the coolest thing in gaming that year, we give an award to, and then find somebody who wants to show up and accept it, right? And then they have to haul it around with them for a year and then bring it back the next year to give it to the next person. So it's all been great fun.
That's a fun tradition.
Started out at my birthday party at GenCon, almost 20 years ago. And James said, "Hey, you're having a birthday party. Can I give out the award at your party?" I said, "Sure." And then ever since then, we've just kind of passed around a hat, and all the different game companies chip in a couple $100, and we use it all to buy beer for people. It's, there are worse ways to spend a night. Mostly it's people that go out, they set up their booth for GenCon, and they're going to be, working the entire weekend. They finish their booth, they go grab a burger, and then they come and hang out with their friends for a few hours. And then everybody goes off, and then it's the next day. The next morning is that scene where everybody's swarming into the hall, and you can barely breathe. So it's really the calm before the storm.
And that's great, that fellowship during that calm. That's amazing that you guys have those kind of traditions at GenCon. Can you tell us a little bit about Shotguns and Sorcery?
Sure. It's a tabletop role-playing game. It was originally, back many years ago, there was a world hunt for Dungeons & Dragons where they said, Wizards of the Coast said, we need a new world for Dungeons & Dragons. Everybody send us your one-page ideas. And eventually got won by Keith Baker, who was a friend of mine who had actually coached in freelancing at the time. It became the world called Eberron, right? Well, I had pitched in a couple of things for this. There was like 10,000 pitches. And I'm like, okay, even if I get to the top of the list here, the chance of me getting in are zero. So more power to Keith. I ended up writing a trilogy of novels for the world, too, for Wizards after that. So I was pretty excited about it. But I had come up with this idea for this game called Shotguns and Sorcery, or the setting. And then when it didn't win, I was like, okay, I turned around and I sold it to a company called Mongoose Publishing, which still does D&D stuff and other games. I think they do Traveler and a bunch of other things. Anyhow, then my wife got pregnant with quadruples. And suddenly I'm like, well, everything else I'm doing is falling off. I was working as the developer for the Lord of the Rings role-playing game for Decipher back in that time too. And I was writing Unapproachable East for the Forgotten Realms for TSR, or for Wizards back in those days. And then Shotguns and Sorcery was like, well, that's the one thing I can let slide. So that's just not going to happen. And I kind of stuck it in a folder on my hard drive for 10 years. And then Robin Laws, who's a pretty famous game designer, was looking for people to write stories for an anthology he was doing called The New Hero. And he asked me for a story. I'm like, you know what? I think I got a story that I'm going to set in the Shotguns and Sorcery universe. And he bought it and came out in his book. And then I did another story for it. And then I did a trilogy of novels for it in the same Kickstarter drives I was doing the Dangerous Game stuff for. And then this artist, Jeremy Muller, said, I really want to do a role-playing game based on this. I'm like, well, I don't have the time for it, but if you want to do it, go ahead. So he ran a Kickstarter about 5 years ago now, 4.5 years ago. The rights to the game eventually reverted back to me. It uses the Cypher system, which is designed by Monty Cook. Monty was one of the guys behind 3rd edition Dungeons & Dragons, one of the lead designers for that. And Monty was also coincidentally one of my first editors in the role-playing game industry back in 91 or 92. He edited a book called Western Hero, which was for Champions, which was the first solo book that I ever wrote for game design. So I've known Monty since, for almost, 28, 29 years at the moment. And so it was nice to be able to get together and, use his game as a basis for my setting. And then we had a guy named Rob Schwalb, who has done a ton of stuff for Dungeons & Dragons, including like the Book of Vile Darkness and all sorts of wonderful things. He was a designer for 4th and 5th edition as well. And he also does Shadow of the Demon Lord, which is a wonderful role-playing game as well, definitely more adult-themed. But he wrote the rules for the game. And so it's been a real neat team to be able to work with. On top of that, I also, when those rights reverted to me, I also got the rights back to do the novels again. I'd given Jeremy's company, Outland Entertainment, the ability to do print versions of the Shotguns and Sorcery novels. So those are reverted to me. I'm doing a ebook and print, actually, and we're going to have the ebook omnibus, which includes the 3 novels, the 2 short stories, and a brand new novelette that I wrote specifically for this. I think there's a paperback on Amazon, a paperback and a hardcover through Drive-Thru Fiction. And I just today got a hardcover with a dust jacket on it that came in through Barnes & Noble. So we'll be doing that through them too. So a lot of cool and exciting stuff for that. I mean, that's kind of my pet passion project. People ask me, who are your 2 authors that probably influenced you most in your life? And for me, it's J.R.R. Tolkien and Raymond Chandler. And this sits specifically at the crossroads of those 2 things, which are epic fantasy and detective noir novels, right? So for me, it's a lot of fun to be able to put shows together in a mashup that sings to me on lots of different levels.
Shotguns and Sorcery is it a fantasy Western?
No, it's actually more of a 1920s fantasy type thing, right? It's set in a world in which 1,000 years ago, the ruler of the dead unleashed a horde of zombies across the world and took over the entire continent, destroying everything, killing everyone except for one mountain. And the reason that the one mountain survived is that all the free peoples came up to the mountain and said, hey, dragon, would you defend us against the zombies until we could build a wall around the mountain? And then we'll live inside the wall until, you can figure out a way to deal with the zombies. And the dragon says, yes, as long as you make me your ruler. And he becomes the dragon emperor that rules over Dragon City. And Dragon City, by the time you get to it 1,000 years later and you've been part of it forever, is now been stratified. So the dragon lives on the top. The elves, who are the most powerful and second longest lived, live just below them. Then the dwarves, then the gnomes, and the hobbits, and the humans. And then down by the wall, where you can still hear the zombies scratching at the stones every night, that's where the goblins and the orcs and the hobgoblins, the kobolds, and the other greenish peoples live. So it's got the old metaphor from fantasy about the different races, but it's transformed them into a class in a city type of setting, right? And I mean, class like socioeconomic class, not like fighter, wizard, thief. So, but it makes for some really intriguing stories. So I mean, there's also this kind of prohibition going on, where one of the drinks that you can get there is something called Dragon Fire, which is actually made with powder from the dragon's scales, and it imbues magical powers on people. So if you're a wizard and your powers are flagging, you can have yourself a shot of dragon fire, and suddenly you all powered back up again. Of course, this is illegal, and the Imperial Dragon's Guard, which is mostly run by elves, will knock down your door and throw you in chains and haul you away if they catch you. Actually, lots of good fun this way, and right. And the main character is a guy named Max Gibson, who's an ex-adventurer that's been at it. He's been retired for 10 years, ever since his best friend died in the last dungeon that they were exploring. And now he's trying to make his way through Dragon City while he, as a human who's on one of the lower ends of the caste system, so to speak.
Very cool. And
there's a murder mystery, and there's undead monsters and all sorts of other fun stuff.
Shotguns and Sorcery is really good for parents who are looking for a unique setting, because the classic Tolkien or Gygax fantasy setting isn't everyone's cup of tea. So little twists like this might be more up their alley. What advice would you give to parents of teens and tweens who are trying to share their love of role-playing games with their families, or trying to get the kids to put down the cell phones and actually sit down at a table? Well, what would be the one thing you would say to them if you could?
Well, I would say that start small, right? Start with the easy stuff. You don't need to go full hog into Dungeons and Dragons, right? Which is a fairly complex game and requires a lot of imagination from people. It's not impossible for anybody to play. Anybody can get up to it, right? But there are all sorts of different games you can play. They'll introduce them to the ideas of doing this kind of stuff before you hit them with the theater of the mind and everything else, right? Settlers Catan is a great gateway game, for instance, that people can get into. When my kids were young, we ended up playing Munchkin. A friend of mine is John Kovalik, who's the illustrator of Munchkin. I know Steve Jackson, Andrew Hackard, and Phil Reed, all the guys from Steve Jackson Games from way back. The problem is Super Munchkin is a backstabbing game, right? Which is, as an adult is great fun. But for a bunch of, kids with a little bit of sibling rivalry mixed in, maybe not such a great way to get through a day. So, because the games were well played, but at the end there were hard feelings. So,
yes, we've had many tables flipped over Munchkin.
Yeah, exactly, right? It's hard for a kid to be able to deal with that kind of stuff, that sense of loss. And it's not just that I lost, but that guy stabbed me in the back, right? I trusted you. I was going to stab you in the back, right?
I had all these curses and I didn't use them on you, and then you used them on me.
Yeah, exactly. So, it's a cruel world, kids. It's better you learn early. But that's not a fun experience, right? So what I did is I switched them over to cooperative games, right? And then you're playing a bunch of people against a system. And there was a Castle Ravenloft cooperative Dungeons and Dragons game at the time, where you played against a system essentially, and they really dug that. I mean, it was fantastic because, again, instead of working against each other, they're trying to work as a team to survive together, right? Which is really what D&D is about too, when you think about it that way. And they had a blast playing that game. We also ended up playing games like Pandemic. Nowadays, we're playing Betrayal at House on the Hill or Betrayal Legacy. Lots of other fantastic games to be able to do that with, where you don't feel like you're competing against your friends and your family so much as you're going through an adventure with them, telling a story with each other. And then that's something that very easily moves into D&D, right, into the full hog experience. So I would say, again, start low. And if you got younger kids, try not to get them into anything competitive. Try to find something that's cooperative, explicitly cooperative, so that, again, they feel like they're all part of the same team, right? And they all have the same goal, which is to entertain each other as opposed to beating the crap out of each other. So.
Well, Matt, thank you so much for being on the show today. I can't thank you enough.
Oh, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.